Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening. Do you like this space? So I have to tell you that the curator of the space and the construction company and the visionary of this space is Mr. Frank Cass. Frank, are you here tonight? If you are, wave your hand. Frank's company built this space. All this vision is him, but I don't. Is Frank here? Anyway, Frank might be here. But anyway, I wanted you to know that because it's important for you to know who did this. Because this used to be a cafeteria, a gym, and all that. So it's turned into this beautiful space. And then my former board chair, who's here tonight, Mark Corner, is the gentleman who got us the money for the space, along with Congresswoman Joyce Beatty. So please give them a round of applause as well. Our hidden conversations, what Americans really think about race and identity. I am Demetrius Neely, and I am the CEO here at the King Arts Complex. Linda will bring Michele Norris, award-winning journalist and author, and Anna Staver, the voice on All Sides in the NPR radio station All Sides, to the stage. But please join me in welcoming Michele and Anna to the King Arts Complex. And many thanks to all of you for joining us this evening. So a little bit about the King Arts Complex. We are a multidisciplinary arts organization that celebrates the contributions of African Americans. We're housed in this east side of Columbus, and so we celebrate a lot of the artists and patrons from this side of town, but we also celebrate people from all over the country because we are named after Dr. Martin Luther King, and like Dr. King, we're for all. Our it factor is that we collaborate a lot, and tonight's event is a perfect example of collaboration, and I'll talk about two collaborations that are coming up. One is a collaboration with the Ohio Arts Education Association, and they bring in the art from high schoolers across all 88 counties in Ohio. Those artists show their art one place. It's a juried art show, and that's here at the King Arts Complex. So we're very proud of that collaboration. Another collaboration we have coming up is we collaborate with local artists to celebrate Amina Robinson. So we have an All Arts Amina Robinson Day on February 17th. We've been doing this since she passed away in 2015, and we celebrate her birthday, which is February 18th. This year we're doing it on that Saturday before. And that will be a lot of local artists coming in, bringing in their art. A lot of people will come in. We'll do arts and crafts and a lot of activities, and it's a fun day. So I hope you can join us for that morning of February 17th. And then the evening of February 17th, the afternoon and the evening, we will host a new exhibit installation in the Elijah Pierce Gallery, which will be collectors' works of Amina Robinson. That is dubbed One Love, the Community Collects Amina. So that's going to be a beautiful show, and I hope you can come out and join us. I've had the chance to have a sneak preview, and I can tell you both will be great. So that's a little bit about the King Arts Complex. You know, this is a great opportunity for us. We have a rare opportunity tonight to talk about race in a safe place. We are proud to celebrate this, to collaborate with Gramercy Books and have this conversation. It is not easy, and it will be an opportunity to share our deepest feelings about a very difficult subject. But again, this is a safe place tonight. You know, the book has only been out a couple of weeks, and there's a lot of buzz about Michele in the book, and it's national recognition and local recognition. The Dispatch did a great piece on it. But we are going to be in the early conversation, so that's a good thing, and that's thanks to Linda Cass and Gramercy Books. Everybody who knows me and knows these talks knows that I value Linda Cass and Gramercy Books, and I love local bookstores. If you go to any city, it could be New York City, Oakland, California, Elm City, North Carolina, and you find a local bookstore, it tells you a lot about the city and the citizens. And you can learn how people respond to books and how people respond to what's going on, whether it be geopolitical or the local politics. In our case, we have Gramercy Books. And in our case, Linda Cass and Gramercy Books is telling the world that we are open and that we're inviting and that we welcome these uncomfortable conversations and that we're unafraid of being uncomfortable. So Linda, thank you for welcoming all of us. And with that, will you welcome to the stage Ms. Linda Cass.
Wow. Thank you, Demetrius, and thank you all for being here. This is just, we're very, very excited to have this conversation this evening and have this opportunity. So makes me proud to be a bookseller here. I really want to thank the entire King Arts complex, the staff, Demetrius, Javon Collins, Dwight Stewart back on the sound. Everyone has been really good friends and wonderful partners, you know, and it's a great venue for us to showcase events here. So we're thrilled to have Michele Norris with us tonight. She's one of the most trusted voices in American journalism. Her extraordinary book, Our Hidden Conversations, offers really a portal that helps us all understand the role of race in our past and our present lives. And moderating tonight's conversation, we're delighted to have WOSU host and producer of All Sides, Anna Staver. And if you were tuned, and if you were tuned into All Sides this past Monday morning, you would have heard the fascinating warm-up to tonight's discussion. So I'm very excited for this evening. Let me just preview the next hour. For about 35 to 40 minutes, Anna and Michele will have a conversation. We're going to leave at least 20 minutes, and it'll go on as long as you'd like, I guess, for your questions and to talk perhaps about your 6 words. And then the book signing will follow, and let me just give you instructions now in case I don't have a chance later. We're going to line up through the back, and the signing table is the middle table there. So we'll line up from the back up to the table for the book signing afterwards. Some very quick housekeeping. First, please turn off your cell phones if you have them. Just wanted to get that out of the way right away. And I just wanted to, while you're doing that, bring attention to 2 Gramercy Books upcoming programs that we're excited about. We have a full lineup. We're booked all the way through May right now. Next Monday, January 29th at 7 o'clock, we're going to present an International Holocaust Remembrance Day program. We're featuring noted historians Elizabeth Barry White and Joanna Sliwa. And they are the co-authors of a book called The Counterfeit Countess. Their book documents the never-before-told story of the heroic efforts of a Jewish mathematician who saved 10,000 Poles during World War II. The authors are going to be in conversation with Dr. Robin Judd, who is a Holocaust expert and historian with The Ohio State University. So that's next Monday night. And then on Thursday, February 29th, we have some events between these two, but I just want to mention these two. On February 29th, also at 7 o'clock, we're going to present a Black History Month program featuring author Sheila Williams and her book, No Better Time. And that tells the story of the only Black women Army Corps to serve overseas during World War II. And Sheila is going to be in conversation with King Arts CEO Demetrius Neely. So that's going to be a special program to go to. Now let's meet tonight's guests. Sometime in 2010, Michele Norris printed 200 postcards, leaving them in various spots around the country and challenging people to express their feelings about race and identity in 6 words. Her instructions were clear and simple. Race, your thoughts, 6 words, please send. And send they did. Before long, she received replies from all over the United States and nearly 100 countries, 500,000 responses to be exact. This became part of the Race Card Project, a Peabody Award-winning narrative archive to which Michele is the founding director. These reflections are raw and confessional, painful and empowering. Michele collected poems and pictures and family keepsakes and long essays once the project went online. And many of these comments are contained in this extraordinary book that we'll be talking about tonight, Our Hidden Conversations, What Americans Really Think About Race and Identity. Michele Norris is a journalist, an author, a podcaster, a storyteller. She's earned several honors over a long career, including Peabody, Emmy, DuPont, and Goldsmith Awards. She's a columnist for the Washington Post opinion section, a former longtime co-host of NPR's All Things Considered, and has served as a National Geographic Storytelling Fellow. Her first book, The Grace of Silence, which we do have here, by the way, was named one of the best books of the year by the San Francisco Chronicle, the Christian Science Monitor, and the Kansas City Star. Before joining NPR, Michele spent almost 10 years as a reporter for ABC News covering politics, policy, and the dynamics of social change. Early in her career, she also worked as a staff writer for the Washington Post, Chicago Tribune, and the Los Angeles Times. Anna Staver is the host and executive producer of All Sides, a 2-hour daily public affairs talk show broadcast on 89.7 NPR News that covers salient issues and events shaping life in central Ohio. Anna came from the Columbus Dispatch, where she covered state politics, writing daily and in-depth stories about the Ohio State House on a range of topics, including school finance, gun control, budgets, public pensions, and legislative races. Previously, she worked at the Denver Post, 9 News in Colorado, the Statesman Journal, and the Idaho Press Tribune. She's the winner of a Heartland Emmy for Best Politics, Government Reporting, and a Best Writing Award from the Oregon Newspaper Publishers Association. She also has a certificate in school finance from Georgetown University. So let's bring to the stage Michele Norris and Anna Staver.
Good evening, everyone.
Can I get my skirt situated? Yes. My incredibly annotated copy of your book.
You know, and you love to see that, right?
We're going to talk about each and every tab, so we might be here a while. Let me just... Well, thank you so much for having me host, and thank you to Gramercy Books and the King Arts Complex. I'm so grateful to be here with Michele. It's such an honor, so thank you all so much. So before we dive into the words people wrote, I want to begin by talking about how the book is constructed. So if you haven't opened it yet, you should, because this is not your traditional work of narrative nonfiction. It feels like a vulnerable and revealing scrapbook of private thoughts. There are lots of photos, there are pages with dozens of different race cards on them, and there's these in-depth reported stories. So I want to know, how did you develop the idea for formatting a book like this, and then how did you convince your publisher to go for it?
Thank you. Can I begin with just a quick thank you? Thank you so much for hosting this tonight. I love independent bookstores, so whenever I meet an independent bookstore owner, I'm scooping them up as part of my tribe. So thank you very much. And what a beautiful center. I'm going to have to come back and just linger a little bit more. It's really beautiful. It's great to be here in Ohio. It always rains when I come to Ohio. I don't know what that's about, but and it's great to be here with Anna. We had a lot of fun on Monday, and we're going to continue tonight. If you do have the book, it's okay to look away from the stage and go ahead and open it up. And because it is a book of unusual form. And as Anna beautifully described, it's some of everything. I wanted to make sure that it felt like a scrapbook. This is a book about race at a moment of division and at a moment when a lot of people are experiencing racial fatigue. And so I wanted to create a book that would jump off the page. I wanted the book to feel like it had a heartbeat. And so I had to think a lot about the design, and I struggled mightily with this. Because first of all, there are 500,000 submissions, and how do you create a book where I only would probably get about 1,000? And then it wound up being a little bit less than that because I wanted photos. Do you know who Lonnie Bunch is? The director of the, he's now the director of the Smithsonian, but he was the visionary, really the man who gave us the National Museum of African American History and Culture. And he knew I was working on this book, and he kept saying, you gotta have photos, you gotta have photos. You have to let people see other people. And so I was fighting for photos. And I wanted to have different font sizes, and I wanted it to feel like a scrapbook. There were certain books that informed me. Do you remember Toni Morrison's The Black Book? My parents had a first edition of that, and I wasn't allowed to touch it unless I had washed my hands, hadn't had snacks. But it was a book that was just, it had all these inventors and entries about land plots, and it was just, really interesting to me. And there were a few other books like that influenced me, and so I went to the publisher, and it did take some convincing, because they're like, wait, you want what? You want color? You want 287 photos? You want different kinds of paper stock? And I just sort of acted like a toddler. When you say no to a toddler, you have young kids, you understand this, and they don't hear no, and they just keep asking. And so it wasn't that I was disrespectful. I just thought, let's be creative and figure out how we can get to yes. And everything in the book is intentional. There are preludes and echoes, so you will see things that are in repetition, and sometimes it's designed, and sometimes it's embedded because I actually studied, and study may be the wrong word because it wasn't like I didn't do a university study, but I looked at how classical music and jazz music was composed, because I wanted to create movements, and I wanted it to feel like it had a kind of an opus quality to it, and so I wanted you to have moments of intensity and then a little bit of Trieste. I wanted you to have a cymbal crashing and then kind of a little bit of a quieter moment. And at the end of the book, if you have one of the books, you might take a look at it. There is a long series of 6-word stories that have no backstory, no photos. And that's supposed to feel like almost like a hallelujah chorus, where you feel like America all singing at the same time in different octaves. And so even the color of the book, the terracotta, the designer that we work with, Jason Snyder, we had kind of a design idea, and then he came in and gussied it up. And I wanted this really particular terracotta color. And I was like, too orange, no, too red, no, too brown. I know I drove him crazy. But I was looking for a particular color because that color, terracotta, means something. If you were from the South, it is the color of the earth. If you visited the South and you have a pair of white tennis shoes on and you get that, it's never coming out. It is the color of jewelry in certain parts of the world. It is the color of the Wampanoag and the Arapaho and the Navajo and the Lakota. It is the color of pottery that people use throughout the world, whether it's tangines or whether you're baking bread in the northernmost Nordic countries. And so in a book that looked at our differences, I literally wanted even the color to be something that no matter where you came from, you would relate to it.
Well, for what it's worth, I can't imagine it looking any other way than the way it came out. And one of the things I loved so much about it is how shareable it is. So I got an advanced copy and I felt super special, but I could show one to my husband. I could share it with my daughters. I could text a friend a picture of it and start a conversation. And I definitely recommend that all of you try it. Like, I texted one, you can text it to your friend and then you can have this wonderful discussion about it. And it's so you don't have to share the whole book. You can share it in bits and pieces.
And it was designed in that way also. You can read it front to back if you want to. And it includes several essays, I think 12 essays and a prologue, introduction, and epilogue. But it also is designed such that you can just, kind of like a coffee table book, that you can open at any page and then just dive in. And we shared this story on Monday. I have a friend who was away for the weekend with her adult children, and her adult children are in relationships that are across color or across culture in some way, or religion. And she left the book, she also had an early copy, she left the book on the kitchen table in the house that they all rented, and it was the centerpiece of conversation all weekend long. And people would pick it up and say, well, what about this story? Well, did you have this interpretation of this? No, I didn't have this interpretation of this. And she said they laughed and they debated and they discussed, and at one point it was just always there. And so that's what you want as an author, again, I said, like a book that breathes, that feels like it's coming into your house and has a bit of a heartbeat to it.
So let's dive into some of the topics that you cover in the book. So the cards in some chapters are grouped by themes, and sometimes they're grouped by just a moment in our history in the last decade. So for example, the killing of 12-year-old Tamir Rice here in Cleveland. And there's a woman who wrote to you after the police footage of that shooting was released. Her name is Kristen Moorhead, and she's a Black mother with a son about Tamir's age. And she writes, "I wish he was a girl." And it was just, I had to take a moment. It's just it's so much in 6 words.
And she sent in a picture. And it's a picture.
And it's in the book.
It's in the book, yeah. And it's she and her son. Her son's name is Che. And the two of them are on a school bus. And they were just at a holly celebration, so they have all kinds of colored paint all over them, and they look really happy. And it's just, the picture is distinctly at odds with the words. And when you read the book, you will see, notice I didn't say if you read the book, when you read the book, you'll hear the story. And she typed those words out in an evening where Che was in the other room. And it was on the evening that they released, and you're in Ohio, so I know you all remember this, the evening that they released the very grainy police footage of the officers coming up on that gazebo, and where his life was extinguished. And he was the same age as Che, and she was just anguished, and she didn't want him to hear her crying, so she's muffling her emotions. And she decides to go, she had heard one of the Race Card Project segments on National Public Radio, and so she decides to go to her computer late at night, and she types in those words, "I wish he was a girl." And years later, I wound up talking to her with Che, and I learned about why she submitted those words. And she didn't wish her son was different than he was. She loves her boy. But she recognized that it was just harder for him, which meant it was harder for her as an adult because he was a young man. And by the time I talked to her, and the lovely thing about this project is that we have been able to follow a lot of these stories over time. So we have these sort of longitudinal interviews. And when I talked to her and Che, because we're audio people, I had them in different rooms because I didn't want her voice to bleed into his microphone. So audio trick. So I had them in different rooms, and I was doing it on Squadcast, which is something that you can do. You can record in quality. It's like a Zoom, but the audio quality is much better. And so they could see each other. We were all in boxes, but it records very good audio. And she's explaining this, and Che is watching his mom talk about the night that she said, "I wish he was a girl." But by this time, he is knocking on manhood. He's 18 years old. He's getting ready to go to college. And after a year of giving him the so-called talk, telling him how he has to go out into the world, he then takes over the conversation and then tells her, "So Mom, this is what it's like for me." And explains to her when he goes in the 7-Eleven, he's a kid who plays classical music, it's basically Claude Still. It's like whistling Vivaldi. He goes into these places and is very friendly to people and kind of hums a little Beethoven or something, so they know he's not a threat. He talks about what it's like to be in the classroom, and I'm watching this happen, and it's the talk in reverse. It's about him telling her, "I took all the lessons," and there's no satisfaction in that for her, right? She's so happy that he knows how to comport himself, but she's also realizing that he'll never really, like he was wearing a mask before COVID. This is how he goes out into the world, and she's wondering if he ever just gets to be, the kind of boys will be boys. Will he ever just get to be, himself. And it just started with a little 6-word story that we get a window. You've heard these kinds of stories, but it's very different when you're actually hearing it mother and son. And when you hear it as a journalist, we're often just getting one side of it because we're ricocheting and then we're moving on to the next story. In this case, we got to spend some time with them and hear not just the mother, but the son. And now he's off at college. And the thing is, I keep in touch with a lot of people, so I could write an addendum, to what's happened since he's gone to school. But it's a beautiful 6-word story that allows us to look at stories in the news in a very, very personal way.
Maybe you can circle back when he has kids of his own. But, you talked about creating a chorus in some places where you could hear from so many different voices. And one of the chapters that you do that is about beauty or being pretty. And the cards were all variations of, you're so pretty for a blank, or you're too cute to be X, or I can't believe that you're Y. And there was one from Cleveland, Ohio, actually, that said, no offense, but you're so pretty.
And it's always said as a compliment. Can we just ask the room, how many of you have heard some version of that? You're pretty for a... And I don't know what your experience is, but the reason we did that is we've received hundreds of cards with some version of this. And many times they're women of color. They're often, in fact, they're usually African-American women, but not always. There's a card in there just enough to make you look pretty. Which is from an indigenous woman whose mother says you have enough white in you so that you look prettier than the average girl who's indigenous. I mean, ow. The thing that was really surprising to me is how often first of all, if we have hundreds of cards, that means a lot of people are hearing it, and that means a lot of people are saying it, and saying it as if it's a compliment and just letting it roll off their tongue. But the people who are usually saying it are not strangers. Most often, the people who write about this say they're hearing this from someone in their love circle, a relative, a neighbor, someone that they know quite well. And that was surprising because a lot of people are talking sometimes they're talking about their family, but when they're talking about the things that really kind of rub them the wrong way, they're usually talking about what happens in the outside world. This is something that happened at the kitchen table. At the family function, on Easter Sunday. And when that happens, it hurts just a little bit more.
Yeah, you had one that said, you're Jewish, you don't look Jewish. And I'm sure the person thought that was a compliment.
And you have some experience with that.
Yeah, I get that a lot. My mom actually converted when I was an adult. She met my dad. She's a blonde Southern Baptist who fell for a Brooklyn Jew. They got married. She converted. It's very sweet in a cross-cultural sort of way. But I would get it a lot. And sometimes I would feel awkward and want to qualify it with like, oh, well, my mom converted. And you could almost see the relief wash over their face. They were like, oh, that's why she's pretty, because she's only half Jewish.
And what we talked about this, so what do you say? You raised your hand. When someone says that to you, what do you say? You don't know what to say, right?
I know, yeah. And now I just sort of do something like that where I think when I was younger, I would more often just accept it as a compliment because it just seemed like a smoother way to get out of the conversation.
So you accept it as a compliment just to kind of move on.
Well, that's how they intended it. But that was my awkward younger self who wanted to please the person who was trying to say it.
Yeah. Anyone else, how they respond to something like that, whose hand was raised? Anybody else? Because we were wondering, what do you say in that case? And I have come to a point where I have this little trick I use.
Which I love, by the way. You should definitely share it.
It's good in a situation like this. It's always very good. It's also very good in any kind of relationship you're in. But when someone says something that hits your ear the wrong way, remember Columbo? Remember he was always like, I just don't understand. And he's the smartest person in the room. I just kind of it's loud in here. I have wax in my ears. Could you say that again? I didn't hear you. Basically to make them repeat it. And I have learned that the filters engage differently when they've got to back it up in reverse and say it a second time. Could you, I can't hear, could you say it closer, slower? And it's very different then. And half the time they're like, oh, never mind. And it's a way of basically taking the teacup and turning it that way. Like, this is not my issue. I feel good about myself. You obviously have, so this is, this one's on you.
You know, it also made me think about another qualifier that we put on prettiness, which is age. Yeah. So my mother and I were looking at old photos over the holidays, and she pointed to one inside about how she used to be young and pretty. And my first thought was kind of like, well, now you're just pretty. But I think we have this idea that prettiness, like, you're pretty for a woman in her 40s, or you're pretty for an older lady. Like, I don't know why we have to put that qualifier that, like, somehow prettiness doesn't get to grow old.
Well, beauty, let's just be clear about this. Beauty and beauty standards are two different things. Beauty is given to everybody who walks this earth. Beauty standards come with a little bit of gatekeeping. They are imposed by somebody else, and there usually is a power dynamic involved in that. And once you start to understand that, it's freeing, and you give yourself permission to just be and be happy with who you are. Now, I can say that, and it sounds like an anthem. My 13-year-old self could not have said that. My 27-year-old self could not have said that. I don't know that my 40-year-old self could have said it. It took a long time for me to get to the point where I can, where I can stand in my personhood and be comfortable and say that. And I wish that more of us would kind of stake that claim on behalf of people who can't. And I also think about not just what I would say if it was said to me, but what I would say if I heard it. Because that's, also, you don't want to get in someone's business, but since so much of this happens at the dinner table, you sort of have permission. What'd you just say? Because at home, I can do that, but I don't know if I will do that in the grocery aisle. I might. But to also help people understand when they're stepping on someone's corns. Because again, this is usually said by someone who thinks that they're doing you a solid. They think that they're saying something very nice about you or something very nice to you.
So you have a chapter devoted to adoption, and actually you have a couple of chapters, some about interracial adoptions, and then some about, well, it's a very difficult title for this chapter. It says, Black babies cost less to adopt. And it's about this ugly aspect of a beautiful tradition where it is not only quicker in the adoption process, but often cheaper to adopt a child of color, particularly a Black boy.
People often ask me, what is your favorite card? What is the most powerful card? What is the most meaningful card? Some sort of superlative question. And it's hard for me to answer. There are 500,000 stories that we've archived and many more that are waiting to be officially archived. But I can tell you, certain cards that really hit me like a wallop. And we've had a few cards that have arrived where people talk about the financial aspect of adoption when it comes to children of color. And that card, that particular quote, Black babies cost less to adopt. I remember the day it came in. I remember where I was. I was on the third floor of my house in the office that I used to call the bird's nest, the house I used to live in. And even though I had done reporting on this before, seeing it in 6 words just really hit me. And it was sent in by a woman named Michele who lived in Covington, Louisiana. And she talked about adopting a child and realizing that, she said, Black babies cost. Now, let's just be clear about something. It's not that babies cost less. It's you're not buying babies, but there is a fee structure associated with adoption. And that fee structure has a sliding scale that rides up and down based on certain immutable characteristics, on the color of the child, sometimes on the child's hair texture, sometimes on whether the child's light skin, dark skin, whether the child is white, Asian, Latino, African American, maybe mixed race, African American, girl, boy. And the reason I said it in that order, because that's kind of the downward scale. And she said in that 6 words, I rue the day that my son will find out about this. And that's one of the difficult things about reporting on this, is that you're putting a spotlight, a magnifying glass on this very difficult aspect of adoption. And in the chapter, I write about what happened to me when we did a story on this in National Public Radio. It wound up kickstarting a very deep and contentious, years-long debate in the adoption industry.
You had some interviews and perspectives from children who had been adopted, and then as adults discovered that they were the cheaper choice.
Yes, yes. And also a child, not a child, but a college student came up to me in Oregon, and I was signing my first book, and she said, I know who you are, and I know what you did, and I know how it made me feel. Ooh. So I do think it's worth putting a spotlight on this issue, but in doing so, I'm ever aware of what that makes someone feel. There is someone in the room tonight to whom this applies, and I will leave it to her whether she wants to, raise her hand or say anything, because I'm cognizant of that. But it has contributed in some way to a conversation that has helped lead to change. There are more states now that are moving away from this sliding scale, this so-called dark skin discount. And instead, and just to help you understand what this means, it's not that, in many cases, it's done for altruistic reasons. African American families don't participate in official adoption in the same way. And this is kind of a weird thing because they often scoop up family members, but it's done in a more informal way. So they don't participate in official adoption in the same way. And it's something that reflects supply and demand. So there are far fewer white children that are available, that they call available adoption situations. And there are far more black children, and many of the black children are actually in foster care or in a separate system. So what they're doing is trying to incentivize people to open up their home and their heart. There's a beautiful intent attached to this. But every single person we talk to in this process, and doing deep reporting on this, admits that this is also a reflection of our values. It's not just market forces. It's social forces. It is absolutely a reflection of our values. So more people in more adoption agencies and more state agencies are trying to create a system where they actually look at this and look at someone's income and take other things and to sort of interrogate this thing, this silent force that's part of the adoption system, and then part of the sort of strange vertigo jujitsu of race. Because race is always, it just presents in different ways and in ways that can make it kind of crazy. Is that the thing is, it works. The family that we profiled in the book, as much as they hate this, and we talked to everybody associated, we talked to the mother, we talked to the child who was adopted, we found through them the woman who gave her child up for adoption, and we tell her story too, and how later she was reunited with the daughter that she had given up for adoption. And it is a beautiful, beautiful story, but one aspect of this is that the discount actually allowed the family that adopted the little black girl, it made adoption possible. So in some cases, that so-called incentive, that discount, can work. And I share sort of the insight of that just to help you understand how difficult, frankly, it was to work on this book. Because you're dealing with family issues, you're inside people's lives, you're dealing with, emotions, and I try to write on top of that, but as a writer, I can't completely write on top of that because I need you as a reader to understand the various facets of these things. And if we're going to actually deal with this subject, then okay, let's deal with it. Let's not deal with it at a distance. Let's actually try to get close enough to it so that we can interrogate it and understand it.
So, what's interesting is it starts out as the race card project. And, one might assume that this isn't a project for people who look like me. But you've expanded it to be race and identity. And you said you did that because you started getting thousands of cards from white people, from people all over the country, all over the world. And I was kind of curious, how did that process go about? How did you suddenly come to be like, well, let's do race and identity?
So if you have one of these cards now, and we'd love to hear your 6-word stories if you're up to it, they say race, identity, your thoughts, 6 words. In the beginning, the postcards that we originally printed just said race, your thoughts, 6 words, please send. They were smaller than this. When I went to the FedEx Kinko's in my neighborhood, I printed 200 cards. My parents are postal workers. My father's gone to glory. He died in 1988, but my mother is still alive. Talk to her every day. And she was thrilled that I was supporting the U.S. Postal Service. But she said, honey, the cards, they're not regulation size. So we didn't check, we just printed some cards. We didn't actually check. So the first 200 cards were not street legal. We had a little problem with that. But when the cards started to come in, postcards, you're not always sure. You think someone might be white because they're talking about whiteness. You think someone might be white because their last name. You think but you don't know for sure. And then we created the website, and now most of the cards come in digitally. And so we have additional information because people send in backstories and they send in photos. And we realized, pretty quickly, the majority of the cards are coming from white Americans. And now at the end of 14 years, for the majority of the 14 years that we've been doing this, the majority of the cards have come in from white Americans. And I have a chapter in the book called Color Me Surprised, because that was not what I expected. I'm a woman of color. It's a conversation about race. If we have a conversation about race in America, it is usually a conversation that is about people of color, usually black folks. It's usually led by black folks. It's usually directed at black folks. If something happens in the news and it has to do with race, there's a few people that you're always going to call, and they're usually black, and they're usually clerics, and they're usually going to opine about something. I mean, let's just be honest. When we talk about race in the media, this is a lesson for me. We don't call, let's bring a white person in to talk about race. We should, but we don't. And so when I put the basket on the table and so many white people showed up, I just was not expecting to engage in a 14-year odyssey of talking to white Americans about race. I didn't even think that was possible. And I don't know why so many have showed up, but I think it might have to be with modeling. So when we created the website and people would come to the website, or people would hear about the project and they would realize, oh, I have a seat at the table? I get to say something too? And then they would share their stories. But I do think it is one of the things, I'm from Minnesota, so we're taught not to call ourselves special, that whole Minnesota nice thing. But I think that this is one of the things that is very special about the project, is that you will find few endeavors around race that have this much buy-in from white America, and from such a broad spectrum of white America. And as a storyteller and story collector, as a journalist, that is great value to me, because I don't have to worry as much about the danger of a single story. That you will see people from all kinds of backgrounds, all kinds of perspectives, way on the left, way on the right, right down the middle, towns I've never heard of, all kinds of experiences. And it was an example of why I felt like I had to keep going with the project, and why I wanted to share it with America, because I had a taproot into something. It was like finding an underground stream. I had a taproot into something that most people don't have access to. People are often saying things to me that they've never said out loud before. When you look at the book, you will meet people that you'll agree with, and you'll meet people that you don't agree with. But I guarantee you will hear things that you have never heard, and aspects of things that you have never heard. And so that's the benefit of doing that. And to answer your question directly, one of the reasons that I now talk about race and identity is because I realize that when we talk about race, the language around race maybe is too small. The aperture is perhaps too narrow. Because for most of us, when we think about race, we think about people who have been raced, as Toni Morrison would talk about, that your racial identity is almost laid over you. And in that sense, whiteness is the mythical norm. It's the cultural norm, and everything else sort of revolves around that, usually in a way that is problematized or otherized. And when you talk about race and identity, if you talk about race, people often think, well, that's a conversation about them. That doesn't include me because it's about African Americans or it's something in a civil rights construct in some way. But if you talk about identity, then the conversation is different. When we started talking about race and identity, we started to see a lot more cards come in, for instance, from people who are part of the Latino diaspora. Because if you're Latino, you're not necessarily checking a box that's based on race, right? You could be Afro-Latino. You could be white and Latino. So it's different. And if you talk about identity, a lot of people feel like, well, race doesn't, that conversation's not about me, it's not for me. Ooh, it's icky and uncomfortable. But if you talk about identity, a lot of people have identities that they are more willing to talk about, and they might be racial, but it might be something else. It might be that you're a member of the military. It might be that you're Appalachian and you speak with an accent. It might be that you're a bass fisherman. It might be that you're a baker. Bakers, it turns out, have really strong identities. And I'm really not joking about that, you know. And we're in Ohio. I mean, OSU. You know, you might be a member of the Ohio State, and that is your identity. I'm surprised that I don't see more red in the room, to tell you the truth. But when I talked about identity, the conversation got bigger. And a lot of times people were still talking about race, but it just meant that more people were in the room.
Yeah,
Can I just say one more thing about that?
Oh, sure.
Do you mind?
No, go for it.
There's just another reason why I think this is important. And I just want to share this because I think this is really important. If we're going to talk about race and if we're going to figure out how we all live with each other, it is important that white America participate in that conversation. Too often when we talk about race, we turn, okay, what are we going to do about it? And you're turning to someone else. And it's almost like, I liken it to, you know, you're not going to lose weight if you're watching someone else on the treadmill. You know, it just doesn't work like that, you know? So if you want to figure this out, and even if you don't want to figure it out, it is beneficial for you to participate in the conversation instead of instead of being a bystander. And in most of my lifetime, the expectation is that African Americans, when it comes to race, we're going to solve this issue. How can we solve an issue that is built around our very existence? I mean, the reasoning behind that doesn't even make sense. And so that is the other reason that I welcome the broad diaspora of stories that we have received in the project, and why I stand up to the criticism that I've received, because some people are saying, well, why do they get a seat at the table? Someone who sends in 6 words, privileged, white privilege, earned it, enjoy it. Why does he have a seat at the table? Well, because we're holding a mirror up around race, and there are some people who believe that. And so if you want to understand what's out there in America, then, you know, we need to include everybody. If that's what we're endeavoring to do, then we want to make sure that the door is open wide enough for everybody to participate.
And one of the things I found really fascinating too is you have people who have multiple identities, both like racial and professional, and how they intersect. And there was one where there was a Latino police officer, and he's eating at a burger joint, and he was an undercover cop at the time, and it's not the nicest part of town, and he's got a hoodie, and he's got his like hood up, just eating a burger, minding his own business, and a white uniformed officer comes over to him and rather aggressively tells him to take his hood off. And they have this very sort of uncomfortable interaction. And I guess at some point he gets upset. He walks over to the table and throws his badge down. And the guy's like, you should have told me you were a cop.
And he writes it so well, and you tell it so well. And it's like, you know, they feel like movie dialogue almost, you know? I mean, I wish I would have been there to witness this, because there's so much going on. But why should he have to tell him he's a cop? You know, and the story has a certain legitimacy because it comes from a cop who's telling the story. And that was another one of the surprising things for me, is that I've heard from so many police officers, as someone who has written either indirectly as a reporter, as an opinion columnist, over time about police shootings, the people that are usually absent from that conversation are police themselves. You know, because the FOP doesn't allow them to talk, because they're often on the defensive, because after something like that happens, there is almost always a lawsuit that, by the way, you all pay for, because it's always tax dollars that pay for that. So police officers usually can't participate in the conversation. So I have been surprised, but in a welcome way, that police officers have sent me their stories, because they feel like they can't speak officially, and a few of them have sent their names in. Brett Mizell, whose 6 words were hated for being a white cop. You know, when I talked to him, he lives in Texas, and he said, you know, that he joined the force because he believed in the idea of, you know, to protect and to serve. And he realized that when he went into communities, people hated him automatically. And he was really honest about what happens. He says, when that happens, you get this sort of we sorts, they sorts mentality, and people hate you, and at some point, they think you're an asshole, and then at some point, you kind of start to become the asshole they think that you are. He was really kind of honest about that, and he said as an older cop, he can now quiet that voice, and he actually left and then joined the force again as a sheriff this time, because he has younger members of his family, and he's trying to be a force for good in his force, because he's just rattled by everything that he sees, you know, going on. That's again another example of a conversation that I just would not, you know, be able to have.
We're going to open up to your questions and your cards in just a moment, but I wanted to give Michele a chance to share her 6 words.
So, when I began, the first 6 words that come to me, and this is what I tell people, don't overthink your 6 words. Because most of the times it'll be the 6 words that come to you. But at the same time, try to be judicious, and don't be one of those people who tries to be slick and hyphenates 17 words. Or uses like carrots and, you know, little things to add extra words. My 6 words were fooled them all, not done yet. I am a brown girl who grew up in Minneapolis, Minnesota, with a speech impediment. And so when people looked at a future for me, they did not imagine that I would make my living behind a microphone, because I struggled with words. And I was shy. And I grew up in an era where we didn't have Gwen Ifill on TV. You know, Susan Stamberg was maybe just starting at Minnesota Public Radio. You know, I didn't see a lot of examples of that. So that was where I began. Fooled them all, not done yet. Over time, and this is the one that I come back to and I stick with it, and I end the book with this, my 6 words are still more work to be done. And that is a belief, and it is a little bit of a retort, because when I began this work in 2010, a black family had just moved into the White House. And we as Americans were talking about America being...
Post-racial.
Now, I asked you to say it to see if you could say it without an eye roll. Because it's hard to even say that word now, right?
Yeah, it feels like, I was like, oh, that's sweet. We were hopeful.
Yeah. We were naive, those of you who believed that we were about to be post-racial. And I'm not the person who's going to sit here and say, told you so, but at the time I was thinking a black family is moving into the White House, and that was a wonderful thing, and a big whoosh, big step forward. But in a country where we had not imagined authority attached to brown skin, where many people had never had a black neighbor, certainly had never had a black boss. Suddenly you had a black man who was making decisions about our tax code, about whether we went to war, the ultimate authority, and he was standing, in many cases, next to another black man who was the Attorney General. This was new stuff for America. And I thought we were going to enter a chapter that would be probably more complicated than necessarily, you know, shutting the door and saying, whew, we're done with that. And so that is a little bit of a retort to that. Still more work to be done, because I think we often, and I will say it again, racial fatigue is a real thing, and I understand it. But I think we want to be done with something that's not done with us. And so I think we have more work to do.
So if you guys were listening on Monday, I said that I was going to share my own 6 words, and I thought about this a lot, and doodling is kind of my love language, so I doodled it for you. So I did a little,
Okay, so you must read it.
Okay, so it says, carefully curated, always afraid of discovery.
Okay, say it one more time.
Carefully curated, always afraid of discovery.
Okay, so I'm interested by curated, afraid discovery. Let's unpack those words. Curated.
So I see that, like, you know, my identity as a reporter, I've felt it a lot more viscerally since 2016. I think, you know, I've been at a Trump rally where I've seen that rope, tree, journalist, some assembly required shirt. And I used to be so proud to tell people what I do, and now I find myself sort of wincing and pulling back and sort of waiting, like gauging their reaction on it. And I feel like people are always looking for clues about what I might believe. So I'm very carefully curated in what I post on social media, in what I wear, in how I act, in what I say. I don't share a lot of views with my friends, with my family. I even hesitate around my children because I'm worried about what they might say to their friends, who might tell their moms. And I think I'm so worried about being found out in some way and kicked out of the job that I love so much that I feel like I've become less knowable to everyone.
That part of that you're describing is, you know, the rules of objective journalism. But America has changed so much that our journalism and our general discourse is often, there's an expectation that you're going to pick a side and that you wouldn't walk, you know, down the center and objectively, you know, listen to everyone. And that has created, and you know what you say about that's actually, there is a T-shirt out there. It's still sold at rallies. Rope, tree, journalist, some assembly required. Journalism carries some peril, you know, right now, and it's another reason I'm really careful about what I do, because I talk about race. And I listen to people on all sides, and I believe very strongly in talking to people. That I'm an opinion journalist now, so we are on a little different spectrum. And as an opinion journalist, I can talk about what I think and what I believe. And but I really try to talk most often not so much about what I think, but what I know, because I think there's a difference there. And so in my work as an opinion journalist, I try to talk about what I know. But in order for me to know that, it means that I've got to get out in the world and talk to people. And again, this project lets me do that. But when I hear you say that, I wince a little bit, because it makes me worried about my fellow journalists, you know, that are out there. I mean, covering political rallies is like combat duty, you know, right now, because sometimes a candidate will say something about a journalist and the whole crowd, you know, you have to be careful about. We won't get into it tonight, but there are different rules of engagement. As you know, when you go to political rallies, you have to be careful. They're monitored. You have to make sure that you have a plan, you know, to get out. And some of this is happening because there are some forces in America and some individuals in America who are deeply invested in our divisions. And they're invested in our divisions often because they benefit from those divisions. And the thing that I ask you to consider, and I don't know what your politics are, we don't have to get into that tonight, but I ask you, whatever they are, just to ask yourself if you benefit from those divisions. Do you benefit from those divisions? Because one thing I do know, Anna, we do a lot of work out in the world. We work in universities, we have worked with the Justice Department, the military has used the Race Card Project, we have worked in factories across America, we've been in hospitals. These divisions have a deep impact on us. They impact our productivity, they impact our military readiness, they impact our GDP. If you are running a hospital, if you are running a military regiment, if you are running a police department, if you are running a college or a university, if you are running a school, if you are running a diner that has 6 employees, they might not agree with each other. And if those divisions get hot enough, if that tension gets high enough, if that chasm gets wide enough, it affects the culture of the workplace such that things aren't getting done. If that's happening on a factory floor, bad things happen when people don't communicate or don't trust each other. You actually are starting to see it in injuries, in people who call in sick. When you walk into a factory and you walk past the parking lot, and the parking lot tells a story of the divisions that you're going to see inside the factory because of the bumper stickers, when you get inside the factory, that foreman, regardless of his or her politics, is dealing with something very difficult that will impact whether they can produce their deliverables. So it's not just about people yelling at each other on TV. It's not just about people waving signs. It's not just about political discourse. I just ask you, when you think about the divided America and people who are asking you to choose sides, if that division actually benefits you. And one thing I can tell you from doing deep dive research on several of these subjects, racism is expensive. It literally, and not just in mental health, it actually, there's a dollar amount that goes with this. And it goes back to, having, did it make sense to have 2 bathrooms? I mean, do you remember the movie, The Help, the book, The Help? How many have read this? They were going to put another bathroom in their house because they didn't want her to use the commode. Have you ever done a renovation? That is not cheap. So this is an example of the mental jujitsu that people go through just because I don't want to be with them. Are you really benefiting from that division? Could you have done something else with that cash that you spent on that and all of the mental energy on top of that?
Well, now it's your turn. If anybody has a question or a card they'd like to share, I think we're going to have some order to this.
Hi. My question is related to microaggressions. I didn't realize until fairly recently that in most of my interactions with people of color that I consider friends, there were often microaggressions on my statements or interactions that were hurtful. And how do we get beyond that? And I'm still having trouble right now trying to get more interaction with people of color. And I'm a bit stymied by my lack of success in doing that. Thank you.
Before you sit down, sir, what's your name?
Sam Haddon.
Sam, thank you for standing up and for sharing that story. Do you mind if I ask you, I can't help but I ask questions. Do you mind if I ask you a couple questions?
No.
You said that most of your, how do you know that most of your interactions, did someone tell you that, or did you have some other kind of epiphany?
Some other kind of epiphany as I learned really what microaggressions were and what they are and those kind of things. I realized that I had done that. And the most interactions I've had and the people I have, I'm no longer in contact with right now, and that kind of thing. So a bit lost in that regard. I'd learned it more from attempting to be more of an anti-racist. That journey started with George Floyd for me.
You know, you can't go back and redo something that's already done, but you can push it forward, and I think it's really righteous what you're talking about. in trying to, you're sending energy in the world that perhaps will benefit whoever that was that you interacted with, years ago because of your honesty and your willingness to be introspective and to not necessarily be defensive about it. Because those woulda, coulda, shouldas are hard. When you realize that you've offended someone, isn't it easier sometimes just to avoid them? Or to just pretend, okay, I'm gonna take a different route. So, I commend you for your honesty and for your willingness to be, to look for opportunities to actually talk about this. You say you wish you had more opportunities.
Yes.
I wish you did too. I wish we could find ways to have these kinds of conversations, and not just in diversity trainings that happen usually one Tuesday in February, and then and then we move on with our lives.
Yeah, I'm chagrined at the amount of disinterest I've been shown when I've approached organizations primarily for people of color, and not getting responses or that kind of thing. Thank you.
So can I just say one thing about that? And that goes back to the thing that I was saying about who gets to be in the room. I have been a little bit of the skunk at the garden party a few times now that started doing this work. And like, for instance, at my children's school, we have this diversity committee. And I was wondering, why is the diversity committee not at all diverse? If it's going to be the Black Parents Committee, let's just call it the Black Parents Committee, and we can do that. But if we're actually talking about the culture of the school and we are in the distinct minority in the school, it doesn't make sense for us to get together and have gumbo. And the majority of parents, the majority of administrators who actually make decisions, aren't a part of this. So when we have these discussions, we have to figure out how we both widen the aperture and make sure that, to borrow a phrase from my dear friend Jose Andres, that the tables are longer. Because truly powerful people are always, they're not building walls. They're finding longer tables and figuring out how to create more room at those tables.
Good evening, thank you. My name is Ngozi Oswagwu, and I'm an obstetrician gynecologist here. And I have actually 2 6 words because they make a difference for me. One is keeping my sisters alive and healthy. And when I turned 50, I realized as an obstetrician, you hear about all these disparities, and I felt, oh my God, I'm not doing anything, nothing is making a difference. So I started blogging every week since 2015 about positive things to help in terms of keeping my sisters alive and healthy. And what's interesting is when people hear sisters, they thought, oh, it's only Black women or women of color. And I said, in the rest of the world, sisters are women. And if we're helping a group of women get healthier, it helps all of us. And then my other word is for me personally, and it's not for me, for future physicians. I think people think when you become a physician, everything's okay and education-wise, but I have found that I had a lot of opportunities that did not come to me because of my color. And I realized that after George Floyd, I have to be vocal. And so I'm fighting now because it might not help me, but I know that for future physicians who went through what I went through, I would not have them do that again where I work.
Thank
you. So those
you.
are my words.
Do you want to say the name of your blog in case people in the room want to find you?
Oh, it's ngozioswagwumd.com.
Say one more time.
ngozioswagwumd.com or keepingmysistersalive.com.
Keepingmysistersalive.com.
That's probably the easier one to spell.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Shalette Stewart. I'm an author and a global speaker and an entrepreneur. And thank you so much for sharing your gift with us. My question is, in our society, there are so many individuals with tremendous, powerful platforms. Leaders in academia, in business, in politics. I'm curious as to if any well-known individuals or celebrities engaged with you in your project. I haven't read the book yet. I look forward to it, and if they're actually reflected in your book.
Yeah, there are a few. I mean, when we first started doing this, in 2010, it was kind of a perfect moment, in part because America was going through this big change politically. We were changing a page demographically. We're sort of in the middle of that. And in terms of our public discourse, there were these new social media platforms. And so the Race Card Project very quickly went to Facebook and what my mother used to call the Twitter. I guess we call it X now. And Pinterest for a while, but not so much there, and Tumblr. And people were engaging. And so we did get actual cards from people, from like the author Sue Monk Kidd, from Soledad O'Brien, Jose Andreas, but he's also, our kids are the same age, so I wasn't surprised by that. But Don Cheadle, you know, the actor Don Cheadle, his 6 words are, you are what you must defend.
Oh, I like that.
And I'm like, oh, Don Cheadle? Really? And then I reached out to him, and, you know, and he had a really interesting, you know, story to tell about that. Ricardo Kivara, who played one of the husbands in Desperate Housewives, he sent in a card. So every so often, you know, cards would come in. And I always appreciated that because it gave us some validation and legitimacy. But I have to tell you, the cards that I think will really sit with you are the ones that really come from, you know, everyday people.
Yes, absolutely.
And one of the things that I've realized, it's important for people who do have platforms and reach to use their voice.
Yes.
But often what shoves us forward are people you've never heard of.
Yes.
You know, the teacher who sat with Ruby Bridges, you know, the coaches who used to let, even in this city, because I read a little bit about it, that, you know, black players and white players were playing secretly at gyms because they were segregated and they wanted them to play better players, things like that. You know, those are the stories that I think that I appreciate that I can excavate.
Yes.
Because they're not in history books. I liken the work that I do to dendrochronology, the study of tree rings. And this is sort of like social dendrochronology. This archive will help people understand those small stories.
Absolutely, they're the news stories. I'm always impressed when the prominent individuals in society will be courageous enough to share their 6 words. I will share mine. All black women are not monolithic.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I just want to quickly interject that if you want to hear Michele interview people with large platforms about really intimate topics, you should listen to her podcast, Your Mama's Kitchen. And it's just about like it starts with like what you might cook or what you might gather around in your mother's kitchen. But it ends up being conversations about race and the way we were raised and class and all kinds of really intimate details. And she's had some really, really big names.
Yeah. We just dropped an episode this week with Matthew McConaughey and his wife Camilla. Thank you for the plug. The folks at Audible will really thank you for the plug, but I'll just say a quick word about it. It's a podcast. When I was a host, when you ask someone, we have to do a mic check before we talk, and people usually ask a question, what'd you have for breakfast? What did you have for breakfast? Nothing. That's the problem. You know, it's a question that people don't answer long enough, and so they say nothing, oatmeal, toast. So I started asking people, what'd you do, what was your first summer job? Or where'd your family go on vacation if you took vacations? Or tell me about your mama's kitchen. And that tell me about your mama's kitchen question always just their face changed when they started talking about their mama's kitchen. So every week we talk to someone who's fairly famous about their mama's kitchen. And it's a way to do kind of memoir, biography through food. But the interesting thing is it was supposed to be the part of my life that was not about race. And every one of the discussions, when I talked to Conan O'Brien, he told this really interesting story that was about identity. His mom was one of the first women to graduate from Yale Law School, one of the first women to work at a white school, fancy law firm. And as one of the first women, when they had important meetings in the wood-paneled boardroom, she was not allowed to sit in on those luncheons. So they made her sit at a card table just outside the door. And he told this story. So you have to go and listen to this episode to hear the whole thing. But the thing that I loved about it is there were a couple of dudes in the law firm who decided, you know, I'm going to go outside and have a tuna fish sandwich with her. I'm good. I don't need to be in the room. And I loved that story because Conan was so proud of his mom for going to work every day and changing the culture. I loved that he talked about the people. I have 3 kids and a nephew we scooped up. And I hope that I am sending young people in the world who would be the upstander, who would say, no, I'm going to take my tuna sandwich out there. I'm good with that. So it's find it if you can.
I'm Paula Penn-Nabrit, and I also had 2 6-word statements. The first was 7+ generations Black American, race matters. And the second one, the myth of meritocracy, race matters. And I think that first one is probably more evolved from my own life experience as somebody who's almost 70. And the second one is more of a reflection of what I observed with my children. And it's disturbing.
What piece of that is most disturbing to you?
I think the most disturbing part to me, and when you mentioned Tamir Rice, that was really triggering. I have 3 sons, and my late husband and I homeschooled our kids. And partly because of the lack of informed education that was happening. I mean, one small piece, when the twins were in the 2nd grade, the school called and said, we need you to come to school because Damon and Charles have been lying. And so we got to school, and she said, I'm just going to show you. They were doing a family tree. She said, I want you to see the things that they put on this tree, which clearly could not be true. And what they had on the tree was that their great-great-grandparents graduating from Morehouse in 1898 and from Spelman in 1881. And I was like, so you're an educated person, you don't know that there have been Black people going to school for like a long time? You really didn't, it didn't even occur to you to interrogate that? You just assumed that these 7-year-olds would be lying to you? So we ended up homeschooling our kids, and we homeschooled them until college. And when Damon and Charles went to Princeton, they were not on campus 30 days before Damon, they're fraternal twins. Damon is very dark, Charles is very fair. Damon was stopped by 5 police officers and asked to show proof of ownership of his bicycle at 10 o'clock in the morning. And what was really upsetting, and what is still upsetting, and they're old and crusty now. My kids are in their 40s. But at that moment, my first thought was relief that he wasn't killed. And that continues to make me so angry.
I appreciate your story. When you read the book, there's a chapter that I write about an encounter that my son had with police, and I note that when you there's someone right back there who had the hand up, right here, and I'll go to you in just a minute, and we'll come up here. And I note that when you are a person of color and you are raising young Black children, that a routine encounter with a law enforcement officer feels like a gift. And so I understand your anger, and I appreciate that. I wonder if you said anything to the teacher, if you've kept in touch, if you realize if that was maybe an epiphany for her and she changes the way that she orders her steps in life.
Yes and no. I tend to I tend to be a tad assertive, so it was definitely an epiphany for her.
All right, hello. I am Madison Ashley, and I have the pleasure of having one of my stories in this book. It's about, I know, it's such an honor. It really is. It's lovely to see you. I know, hugs, hugs. And I just want to thank you because I've been talking about adoption with my moms since I was born, honestly. And it feels like a story that is so necessary to tell, but it can be so exhausting to repeat the same thing over and over again in order to feel like you have a place in the world. So I just want to thank you because I feel like I have a physical copy of a story I can share to my friends and my family without having to expel the amount of energy that it normally takes me to share my identity to the world. So I just want to thank you, and it's an honor to be a part of the book.
You know, you have me up here crying, fat tears. Maddie, can you stay up for just a minute? So when I knew you were in the audience, because we had communicated but had not met each other,
I know,
and
I
I
have
knew you
your
were coming
phone
tonight.
number. Oh my gosh, I'm so
I know,
honored.
we texted each other.
Yes, tell me what's up.
But I knew you were in the audience, and I didn't want to call you out unless you were, willing to speak. But, this is what I was talking about. I tell Maddie's story, and Maddie's mom participated, and Maddie's bio mom, birth mom,
Yeah, birth mom.
participated,
My moms.
and your story is really beautiful. And this is a chance for me to say thank you for allowing us to allowing me to tell your story, to gift this story to the world, because I think it will crack open conversations. This is something that's really, really, really hard to talk about. And it's one thing when you just talk about the numbers, and the numbers are, we have a chart in the book. Oh, I'm so sorry, you ruined my mascara. We have a chart in the book that just makes it clear, the number, the fee structure. But it's very different when you hear a story, when you see, someone and they share that story. So you're a beautiful young woman. You're a brave young woman, and I thank you so much. And I'm sorry that Dawn isn't here.
It's okay. I'll tell her all about
tell
it.
Jessica I said hello also.
Thank you. I will. Thank you so much.
So maybe you can come and sign books too.
The honor.
We'll work our way up front.
You mentioned at the beginning that you were a little surprised at how many white folks responded. This is an ingenious project, and part of the genius is lots of white folks have a very difficult time talking with black folks, especially about race. So this allowed a lot of white folks to offer their opinion on race in a safe space.
Right. I think you're right. Tell us your name.
Mark.
Mark, thank you. Because one of the things we realize is that you don't have to have that face-to-face conversation so you can say things. It does mean that people say some wild stuff. So just saying, they just drop a bomb, just saying. But when we do work institutionally, we also realize that the benefit of a 6-word project is that there are people who are hand raisers and there are people who are not. And you have been in meetings where the same people speak up over and over again. And that has been, there are so many lessons in this project, but that's been a big one for me, is blind spots. And realizing that in every room I enter, in every institution that we work in, even within my own family, who are the people that we're not hearing from because we haven't made a pathway for them? And often we're leaving genius behind, often we're leaving wisdom behind, often we're leaving perspectives behind that could really benefit us. And so I know when we work in institutions where people are asked to send in their 6-word stories, people who would never, ever, 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 ever speak up at that Tuesday meeting in February have a lot to say if they can just sit in the glow of their computer screen and have their say and then hit the send button. So I think you're right about that.
I want to thank you for being here this evening, and I'm kind of depressed about the audience that's here. I would have liked to see more black folks.
Hold the microphone closer to you.
Yeah, I would have liked to see more black folks here today. You opened the door with a very simple message. In the diction field, we talk about keep it simple, stupid, KISS. And I saw a listing of you on Gramercy books that you were going to be here, and then I saw you on PBS. And I was very impressed with your interview. You have a simple message to open a message to all people here. My 6-word piece is that shame we haven't gotten it right.
Say it one more time with the mic close.
Shame we haven't gotten it right yet. It's a shame that I'm 75 years old, and I grew up in Harlem, New York, and Malcolm X was one of my very first heroes, and I grew up in the middle of the civil rights movement, and it's a shame where we are today. I appreciate that you made it very simple to people that you can say it and you need to do it. The gentleman over here said something, finding his way, in a sense. I remember working in a population, and they asked me to do culture diversity training, and my director asked me to do a training, and it simply destroyed my relationships with the people I worked with. They were very friendly when I had to tell them things about cultural diversity. It was hard for them, difficult for them to handle. I could see people that worked with me meet me in Lazarus. If any folks are familiar with the old Lazarus downtown, I would be sharpening down Lazarus, and people would avoid me. So I just wanted to say that you've made a simple thing that I wish more people would pay attention to your book or read it, and I certainly will enjoy reading it, and it's a pleasure that you did it.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate your honesty about that, because you speak a fundamental truth that sometimes when you talk about race, not everybody wants to hear it. It's uncomfortable, and sometimes people do ask, when you have these conversations, how do you have them? And one of the things that I do advise is maybe set up rules of engagement and let people know that it might be uncomfortable, and that maybe it's worth figuring out how to be comfortable with being a little uncomfortable. But one of the important things in setting rules of engagement is to say, okay, if it gets uncomfortable, we're going to stay at the table. And we're going to figure out how to continue to interact with each other. And maybe if you go in, I'm not saying it makes it sound so easy, and it's not. But if you go in with that kind of rule of engagement, it's more likely to happen. We do that in our families. We have all been to Thanksgiving where Uncle Earl says something and the conversation goes way offline. You know, we have all been at holiday dinners where you love the people at the table, but you don't love their values. But because they're family, you stay at the table. And I think in a divided America, we have to figure out how to do that in our public spaces in the way that we do in our family spaces.
So my 6 words are, they gave me skunks and monkeys.
Wait, say that one more
They
time.
gave me skunks and monkeys. So my sisters and I are the first black kids to integrate the schools in the state of South Carolina. My sister was in the 1st grade, I was in the 3rd, and my other sister was in the 6th. And as an 8-year-old, my teachers passed out those little Valentine's Day cards, you know, those tiny ones you give to all the kids. I always got a skunk or a monkey. And I didn't think about this till just maybe a year ago. So it took me some 50+ years later to remember that. I don't know what it did to me. I just know it took me some 50+ years later to remember that. And I'm hurt by it now, but I wonder if that little 8-year-old was hurt by it. I don't know.
So I wonder if you had enough love and support in your family that,
Oh, absolutely.
because did you bring the skunk and monkey home?
I can't recall.
Okay, because I was wondering if Mom saw the skunk and monkey, if,
I'm sure I did, but
Yeah.
the love in my family was, so we were ridiculed by many people that looked like me. What are you sending your kids to those schools for them to be called names and be called the N-word and all that? So my family embraced us. We were being asked to do what they wanted us to do. Of course, we were kids,
Right.
but they were trying to, make a difference with us. And as it turned out, by the time we got to integrated schools, we were way ahead of all the other kids. But yeah, I don't know what that did to me, but I just remembered it like about a year ago.
yeah.
Yeah, but the love in my family, the way they wrapped their arms around us, and it was unconditional. It was amazing.
What made you remember it?
I don't know. That's a great question. Actually, I was just talking to my assistant about it recently, and it just came to me that that's what happened. We fought a lot of battles, of course. My parents' position was, I don't care what they call you, they cannot touch you. And one kid, we were at recess and at the water fountain rushing, and some kid pushed from the back, and this kid pushed me into the water fountain. He didn't intend to do it, it's just it was a big push. And I turned around and I just punched him, and I punched him real hard, and I started crying because I didn't know what to do. I'm 8 years old, and he said, Demetrius, why did you do that to me? And I said, because you hit me. And I'm crying saying it. But that's the only time I'd ever been touched, and I never thought that was intentional. But my sister in the 6th grade, she fought every day. They had to put her back in the black school. She was not having it. And so, we all had different experiences. My sister in the 1st grade didn't know any different. She thought she was the same as everyone else because her teacher came to our house before school started. I heard a teacher say this once, kids should not get ready for school. We should get ready for kids to come to school.
Wow.
And that's what her teacher did. So Ms. Brown welcomed her from the beginning. She never knew any different. She never knew she was a black kid in a white school. I knew, because my teachers gave me skunks and monkeys. So,
Thank you for sharing that story.
Thank you. My name is Grace. I want to share 2 points. One is very quick, my 6 words, Chinese American, American with Chinese heritage. Because as Asian, we are considered like a perpetual foreigner, no matter, like you can tell I have accent, I'm 1st generation, but many people, even they are 5th generation, they are still considered foreigners. And also, I think right now both parties, they are using basically China bashing as the way for the political gain. So I think this probably will have nothing to do with people who are truly in China, but those Chinese Americans, they will sustain the negative impact. And my community, like truly affected. So the coronavirus, what happened is just one window brought attention. So I think maybe there's always silver lining to every negative things happen to us because the anti-Asian hate was brought to light even after like a few hundred years. Let me see. More than 100 years since the first Asian American, Chinese American come to this country. So that's my first point. So second point, I really appreciate, Michelle, you brought up the divide in this country because I think the polarization is just destroying this country. And now I call my hometown, and I think everyone should try to do something. So for me, I try to join the ranked choice voting. I think I try to bring that to Ohio. So I think it's a great way to bridge the divide among the people. And also I joined the grassroots conversation called Brave Angels. They're trying to bring people from different political views to try to have the grassroots conversation, to listen to each other, not necessarily change each other's opinion. So I think we need those ground-up changes and also the systematic changes because just like those political campaigns, they use this divide to get where they want to get elected. So for this point, I really appreciate that. Anna, like in her first week, she invited the executive director from Ranked World, Ohio, to do an interview on the election day. So I really appreciate that. And also tying to this point, so Michelle, I think because the country is so divided, even the conversation about race or your project itself, I think some people will say that's a gesture to divide the country, because even the word DEI, like diversity, equity, inclusion, is now considered a toxic word to divide the country. So I think I really appreciate your platform, like you mentioned. Yes, welcome the white people to join this conversation. We need to invite more people to join conversation to make the table longer. So my question for you, or my challenge for you is, are you using your platform to also try to bridge the divide?
You know, the epilogue in the book is about creating a generation of bridge builders. And I love what you say about bringing people together, not to make them agree, but to allow them to listen to each other, because I think that I don't use the word common ground so much anymore, because I think it's asking a lot. The divide is pretty great, but if you can cross a bridge and learn about someone, there's some benefit to that, so I really appreciate it. There was one gentleman who had...
the time is...
Can we just do those two, and they can ask their questions together, and I'll answer them together?
Okay.
Because they were the two dudes with the hats.
Okay, can you do it together?
Yes. All right. You go ahead first.
Thank you so much. I just want to know where you see this project going. Like, what's the legacy that you hope to lead? Like, as far as like, is this going to be an installation in a museum or something like that? As well as like, I'm sure there's more steps in your brain.
Okay. So, and question number two.
Question number two. Ready, go? Okay, my name is Mark Butler. I'm from Camp Delaware, Ohio. Camp Delaware, Ohio. My question is, so you want to talk about lynching? I won't go any further than that. My 6 words, I want to be free me. Second set, come see Camp Delaware for freedom.
Okay, I don't know what Camp Delaware is, but I am intrigued. Thank you for your 6 words. Did you know that So You Want to Talk About Lynching is a chapter in the book? Yeah, you've already read it. So there is, I write about the language of lynching and how we too freely, I think, in my mind, use these words. So thank you for that. And we got your name, but we didn't get your name. Seth, thank you for your question, and it's a nice way to end. I hope that this archive will be of use to the Anna Staver of the future. I hope that a journalist down the road, an archaeologist down the road, a sociologist down the road, any kind of storyteller who is trying to understand this very interesting moment that we are living in will be able to use this project to understand this period that is bookended by the presidencies of Barack Obama and Donald Trump, punctuated by a global pandemic and climate change and economic tumult and the storming of the Capitol and the reversal of Roe v. Wade. I mean, it is a very interesting, the presidency of Joe Biden, very interesting period. And so we hope the archive lives in a space. We're trying to find a home for it so that it outlives me. And we're also looking for, now that it's in a book, looking for other ways to present it in the world. We've been in a few museums. We are talking about a museum installation. We're talking about a podcast, where people, and I will say just a word about the audiobook. In addition to buying the book, I'm starting to tell people to think about also listening to the audiobook, because many of the people in the book, we recorded our conversations. And so you will hear them tell their own stories. So in the way that I wanted the book to feel like it had a heartbeat, I wanted the audiobook. We're audio girls, that's what we do. So I wanted the audiobook to feel like a podcast, to feel like you were inside of a episode of This American Life. And that's the way that feels. So thank you for the question, and thank you so very much for having us. And Anna, you're the best.
Thank you. Michele Norris, Anna Staver, this was wonderful. Let's maybe continue a conversation among us. This conversation's beginning. Let's have a conversation. Maybe if you're having the book signing and you're in line, talk to each other too. And let's try to revisit all this sometime soon. Thank you.
Got it.